someone has a question for John or for Janne, but if not, we can go and discuss the final declaration that was distributed. The final statement that was distributed. Please, Ana Marta.
This is actually a question for both of you and for us all, actually, which maybe, you know, this is the general discussion, so it's adequate. So, after all these days and our reflections here, what do you think are the chances of a new civic humanism, no, that renews that counteracts the degradation of public conversation and the polarization of which we are witnessing in populism, partly because of the internet, but not only the internet. The fact is that we have a very simplistic approach to social and political realities, and we cannot see how to counteract that in an efficacious way. That's the...
Yes, well, I don't have the answer, obviously, but the diagnosis is, of course, correct. There is this vulgarization of politics, and the politicians have to... I read Norwegian political speeches quite often, and there's a trend to make them very, very simple, short sentences, pep talks, more than... It's a sort of the general political dialogue or talks are at a very, very low level. So it's as if nothing is serious anymore. There's no serious consideration of facts, or there's no, it's sort of just some slogans in the political discourse. And that is very disconcerting, because we don't have really a populist problem in our country, and nothing really dramatic happens there. I just looked at the main tabloid, and the news this afternoon that was in that tabloid on internet is that dog killed rabbit. The dog has disappeared from the scene of the crime, so to speak. But the dog killing a rabbit is in the news. So there's really something very, very troubling here, that those who are attracted to politics are not serious leaders, it seems. So they are very interested in popularity and in being, well, doing almost anything in politics, talk shows or whatever. They do almost anything to be popular. So maybe there has to be a real shock of some kind, that something serious happens, and then there has to be a serious response.
Well, I think we should now look at this final statement. We should use this last half hour to do it. Let me shortly explain why we have written it and how it came about. It is general practice, not at the workshops, but at the plenaries of our academy, to try to sum up the results. And of course, such a document can only be very general and has to try to garner largest possible consensus. I was entrusted by our president, Stefano, to write the first draft of the text, and then the text circulated among the members of the council. And then today, I think, Stefano, you forwarded to everybody else. But yesterday it was circulated among the members of the council, and I made a lot of suggestions, for example, of Archbishop Roland, Stefano, Pierpaolo, the Chancellor, Professor Kwan, the Chancellor, to enrich it. And so the question is, do you suggest any other additions and changes that we should make to this statement? If I rightly understand, the statement will be included in the volume that we want to publish with the acts of the conference, and you will get an email from me repeating it again, but two data are important. We ask for the 1st of October to send us your final version, so that the volume can appear possibly even in 12 months, perhaps even in the spring of next year. We would like to have a volume not too much afterwards. Second important aspect is, for reasons of homogeneity, we have to put a limit of 30 pages to the text. So if your text is longer than 30 pages, you should cut it down to 30 pages, because it's not good if one paper is 15 and the other 80 pages. That wouldn't make sense. So please, let's try to, you can have less than 30 pages. You're not obliged to extend your papers to 30 pages, but please don't go over 30 pages in order to have a volume consistent. Third aspect, which is very important. As we all know, English is a very difficult language. I myself feel it every day because I'm obliged to speak a language which I don't really know. And it is important that you try to get a native speaker to look at your paper. We will have within the Academy, Gabriella and her sister, who are native speakers of English because their mother was an English woman, will look at the papers. But they cannot do everything. So we ask you very seriously to try to find a native speaker whom you know to make a first correction of your text and then hand it in by October 1st to the Academy so that Gabriella and her sister can then go over the last minutiae. But it is not fair to hand in a paper that is written in, let's say, a language that has English words but whose syntax is simply very, very different from what normal English is, and expect Gabriella and her sister to rewrite everything. That's simply not fair. We cannot ask that from them. So these are the three aspects for the publication. And of course, those of you who spoke in slides, we need a real text. It's not possible to hand in a series of even 50 slides. That's not a way how you can publish an academic volume. It goes without saying, but I wanted to repeat it. So these are the basic aspects, and I'm very confident that we'll have a very useful volume. We have covered a lot of problems connected with both the history of nationalism and with some of the current problems of it. I accept humbly the criticism that my friend Paolo Carrozza first made, that the selection of the speakers is still too Eurocentric, because we had China, we had India, we had Africa, we had Russia, but one could have excluded more non-European countries. I want to mention it, that we tried. We wanted to have a Latin Americanist. I wrote to several experts on the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottoman Empire was one of the large multinational empires. We tried to have an expert on Indonesia, but for various reasons it was difficult to get them. So the fact that the Europeanists answered more quickly and that it was easier to get them was part of the planning committee. But I found your point, Paolo, very legitimate, since we want not to commit ourselves to some form of blind nationalism. We should have perhaps tried to include more of the world. We made a serious effort, and I'm very happy about the paper on China, on India, on Africa, and one could have done more. I'm aware of that. Believe me, we tried, and it's easier to find an expert on Spain, also given the nature of our academy, than experts on the Ottoman Empire. That's simply so. So thank you for your very important criticism.
Add a couple of notes. Don't forget to send a final version of your papers to both the Secretariat and also to his personal address. That will save time, because otherwise the Secretary should send your papers to him. Now, the final statement that you have in front of you, as Vittorio mentioned, will be published, included in the publication. But before that, the Secretariat, the Chancellor, will send it also to the Secretary of State, and they will do whatever they want to do with that. So since we circulated the final statement already 2 or 3 hours ago, we take for granted that you had the chance to read it. So now this is the proper moment, if you have any specific remark, any change, any suggestion, so that before we end up our session, we can correct the text. So please, I leave that to you. But if you have this remark, refer to the text saying page 1, 2, or 3, line, etc., etc. Thank you.
Yes, I think it's a very good summary statement. So I only have one question about meaning. The rest is fine, I think. And the question is on the first page, and it's paragraph number 3, starting, there is no reason to consider nation states as the only legitimate or even privileged form of statehood. That doesn't make sense to me because a nation state is the definition of state in the current world, at least used nationalstat. Nationalstat is the state. But if this is meant to be a mono-nation state, then that's understandable. But the use of state and nation state is rather interchangeable in the literature. Yeah. So maybe that could be clarified.
Okay.
Very good. I think this,
yes.
Yes, I meant that by nation state as opposed to multinational states. But you're right, let's say mono-nation state. So,
please, Marcelo.
One suggestion, given the nature of the papers, our colleague from the United Kingdom, Dr. Mataletti, Father, we need to have a sentence on immigration. In the 21st century, you can't think about nation states without including this fundamental challenge of immigration.
Where would you locate
a sentence from the Holy Father's presentation yesterday would suffice. And I'm happy to, I didn't do a Talmudic reading yet, careful exegesis, but I'm happy to send you, Vittorio, an email tonight or later where to put it.
Yes.
But something is a friendly suggestion. Also, Vittorio, may I suggest you ask for a word limit, not 30 pages, but a word limit. It's easier to make it standard that way.
I know.
It may be
usually 30 pages and standard pages correspond to 10,000 words.
Okay.
10,000 words.
Yeah.
10,000, more or less. Of course, there is a margin of flexibility. We are not so rigid, but you understand that. Okay? 10,000 with the flexibility of 10, 15% at the most. Okay? Other remarks? Yes, on the text. Please.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for preparing the text, both Vittorio and Stefano. I think you've synthesized so many different things. Overall, it's really admirable, and I think it's
yes, but
very
this is a work, a collegial work of the whole council.
Well, in any case,
not only the two of us.
It's quite synthetic of so much that was done here in 3 years. In 3 days. I have just some small comments, some slightly larger ones for discussion and consideration. So one is the title does not reflect the title of the action that we've actually used for the plenary. That could be made correspondent. A more substantive comment is this one. On page 2, in that middle paragraph, and then in the middle paragraph on the subsequent page, there are various references to institutions, to the UN and to the European Union in particular, to the need for a new institutional model, citing Caritas in Veritate, and then a reference to the undermining of supranational institutions, again referring to the European Union. To me, the central point of that is really important and valuable is the one that refers to Caritas in Veritate. In other words, we do absolutely need new institutional models at a global level to govern the problems of the universal common good. That seems to me indisputable and really important to emphasize. What makes me a little more hesitant is the potential reading that the current institutions we have ought to be beyond criticism. No. I mean, we all know that the United Nations is a very ambiguous entity. I mean, in some ways it really serves the common good. In some ways it really doesn't and has failed to do so. Similarly, the European Union, we've heard, overall has been an arrangement of considerable success. There's no denying that. But I don't think we should imply that it's beyond criticism and that criticizing and taking a critical stance with respect to the European Union is necessarily a bad thing. I mean, there ought to be room for reasonable political disagreement there. So I'd be more inclined to sort of be careful in those sentences not to imply that it's bad to criticize current institutional arrangements, and instead really emphasize the one observation that we need effective institutional arrangements at a global level.
Paolo, what would you say if I add at the end of that paragraph,
Page.
second page, at the end of second paragraph, to which he was referring, if I add, all these institutions are obviously in need of further development and correction of errors, but they cannot be abrogated without being replaced by more complex ones, or something like this, so that we say we want to go on in that direction, trying to make them more functional, better, but we don't think that legitimate criticism of the European Union, in my eyes, is try to reestablish the balance of powers in the European Union, etc., but not let's destroy it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something like this.
Did you have a specific
I
suggestion?
would say Bishop Roland has raised his hand for a long time. I think first he and then Rocco.
But I'm sorry, may I finish? I have a few other comments first.
Yes.
Oh. And I'm sorry, I'll try to be brief. At the very top of page 3, there was one sentence that says, nationalism can be manifest itself in unjustified secessionist activities. That's a sentence that, to me, begs a real sort of inquiry about, well, what counts as unjustified? I mean, if I'm a Quebecois and I want independence, and I don't think it's unjustified to advocate for the secession of Quebec, is it? I mean...
Well, look, you are an international lawyer, so exactly no, international law does not allow for secession. That's a general principle of international law. Of course, states can come to an agreement when they allow a referendum on that, and if the center, the central government allows for such a referendum, that's completely fine. The United Kingdom allowed Scotland to have a referendum. That is obviously a justified legal procedure. But I personally think, obviously, we have to discuss it today. The position that I defend is that of positive international law, and I think also after what we heard this morning from our friend Alan about the not very successful story of secession in the case of South Sudan, to remind people that there is no general right towards secession. Some people really believe that.
I won't press the point. I think the word unjustified does a lot of work there, but that's what does the work that you're talking about, and that's fine with me.
Okay.
Two sentences, two lines further down, there's a reference to 3 areas in which refusing international cooperation can be a manifestation of an unjustified form. And I read that and I think, well, why only those 3? There are a bunch of other areas that I could include in that list too. Migration is one of them, Marcello-oriented. Human rights would be another one.
Yes, we can say, right, in areas such as.
So I would include, either make it clear that that's only a beginning of it,
areas such as.
or phrase it in more general terms and say, in those areas that are essential to common coordination of the common good, or something like that.
That's very good. It's very good. At least the following areas which are essential for the universal good, yeah?
Now, the last comment I have in some sense is a much more open question, and I pose it for consideration, not to press a point. But at the bottom of the second page where it makes a distinction between patriotism and nationalism, my own instinct would be to not draw the evaluative distinction so sharply. That in the social science literature, in political theory historically, nationalism doesn't always have this negative connotation. And many theorists and many social scientists don't define nationalism as including that exclusionary aspect. So I'm not sure that we should. I think it would probably be better to say nationalism, and then to qualify it and say nationalism that is exclusive, that denies the rights of others, that is imperialistic, that is aggressive. All of these forms of nationalism are to be condemned. But nationalism as such is a more neutral term. Now, I realize that is in contrast to the paper that we just heard, drawing on the thought of John Paul II, and that's why I think it's open for consideration, and I of course will follow whatever the judgment of my colleagues is, but that's my own instinct.
Very helpful, Paul. Thank you so much.
Good, thank you.
Archbishop Roland is a person who has, in his well-known goodness, waited for a long time, even if you had raised your hand early on.
Monsignor.
No, I come back to what you have just Echo. In the tradition of the social doctrine of the church, nationalism is considered as negative. Patriotism is positive. Even Pius XI started saying that. We cannot say that it is synonymous, and no way. So I think most of the contributions we had here underlined this difference. It is a feeling, a national feeling is patriotism, that's positive. You become to be nationalist when you deny to the other the right to have the same feelings for his own homeland. So that was. I only wanted to say that our title should stick to the official reading, which is in singular. We see it first here, first line, state, nation, not nations, and then nation, state, singular, even with capital letters in English.
No, I only corrected when it had been said by, but it was a misprint,
Sorry, this is just to weigh in on the debate we were just having about patriotism and nationalism. I obviously am not familiar with the social doctrine of the church, but in political theory, I completely agree with Paolo, that in political theory, patriotism can carry the same negative connotations that nationalism does in the present. So that patriotism, in a sense, can have some of the negative effects, and did have some of those negative effects before nations came. Patriotism performed the same role before nationalism came. You could mobilize patriotism in the service of not necessarily just causes. And historically and in political theory, that distinction, has been made and can be made. So I agree with you. I think it would be better to be a little ambiguous about this.
Thank you very much.
There is a particular thing I'm missing, and I did miss this even in the concept note. State to what end? Why is it so important to study the state, the nation, and the nation state? Why? I can see the conflict part, but what was the main purpose that made us go into the nation state or the state? One line in the concept note to me did give me what I thought I was missing as the dispenser of the common good. And doesn't that bring it nearer to the social doctrine of the church? In other words, this seems just to be standing in isolation, a study of the state and the nation state. But what for? I don't know, somewhere at the beginning to literally locate the state in a particular perspective. I can see the conflict part of it. Were we doing it just to say there are lots of conflicts in the world arising from the activities of the state, but what is the raison d'etre for the existence of the state in the first instance? To prevent conflict?
This is a final statement of a three-day discussion. That question should have put at the beginning, not at the end. In other words, we are now asked to approve these 3 pages, but I understand your position. But as you know, there are different views on the question that you are raising. Jane.
I think we can, if we want to add something, it should be at the beginning that the world is made up of states. I mean, it's the international politics is decided by states, something to this effect. But it's obvious. We don't need that really. I wanted to point out that we shouldn't write supranational about international organizations because they are usually not supranational, they are international organizations. And the only... No, I don't prefer it, it's a matter of fact, because supranational means that the organization can decide against the will of states. International is the main rule, and then we have some exceptions, which is in the EU pillars, you know, the majority voting and the monetary union. So this is, and the US UN Security Council can be argued to be supranational because it binds all states, but only politically. Yeah. So it should be as international organizations. And I don't think we should get into any big, you know, confusion about patriotism and nationalism. As Archbishop Minarat said, the standard understanding is this difference. Patriotism is love of country and is something normal and to be expected, and nationalism is something negative in that sense.
Just a matter of clarification. Would you like international or transnational?
No, it's international. IOs. Yeah, it is international. It is the cooperation among states.
We also developed the idea that in some cases reaching supranationality will serve the common good and preserve the identity of smaller nations. This is one of the results, I think, of the whole session. If you come back only to national sovereignty, to the state, to the national state, then our whole reflection, was it really necessary? There is no perspective. I think the word supranational must appear somewhere because it is a need of the development we are knowing.
Not supranational, but more binding national obligations of something of the sort, because supranational means that you sign away sovereignty to some agent above your state. And that,
But this happens in the European Union.
yeah, but I mean, this is hardly going to happen in any area. On the contrary, the problem is how to have more efficient cooperation among states.
You have a big nation and a smaller one, it is obvious that the big nation will destroy the small, will cancel it. That is why in certain situations you need a supranational, because otherwise the fairness argument is not guaranteed. Even John Rawls has this argument in his theory of justice.
Yes, yes. I mean, there's a lot of literature on this, on how this could work and so on, and how small states can have a say and so on. But, I mean, NATO has equality of membership, one vote, one state. Who decides in NATO is basically the US. So, I mean, this would be having a supranational organization, then the US, for it to agree to it, it would have to have a privileged place. UN Security Council is a big power concert where 5 states decide for the rest. It is supranational.
But take the case of a European Central Bank in Frankfurt. That is supranational. No, it's not.
Yeah, monetary policy is the exception as a policy area.
Well, by now it's exception, but you can be sure that in few months we will change it, because we will move to the fiscal union as well as to the civil compact. In other words, it is true that so far it has been an exception, but by itself, the European Central Bank is supranational. It's not international.
Yes, I say it's the exception, but it's not very likely that there will be such exceptions, because states have to agree to them.
Yes, yes.
We are also interested in normative reflections. You are completely right that usually cooperation between nations exists in the form of sovereign states agreeing to cooperate, keeping the right to withdraw from the cooperation whenever this is allowed by the treaty. You are right that this is the normal case, but I do think that Archbishop Roland and Stefano and Pier Paolo, and you speak in a moment, are right to say the European Union is a remarkable example to go beyond ad hoc international cooperation. It created supranational institutions, and we, in line with the social doctrine of the Catholic Church, want to support the formation of supranational institutions. That seems to be the point that you wanted to make, and I think we should support it. It's in agreement with the Catholic doctrine, and it corresponds to the historical experience of Europe. Pier Paolo, forgive me.
Sorry, I am responsible for having suggested the supranational term. And that's because I think that, as a matter of fact, beyond the financial matters, the euro, Frankfurt, the central bank, etc., there are other examples of giving part of national sovereignty to Brussels. And to Strasbourg as well. Think of the courts, the European Court of Human Rights. It's binding. No, well, but it is strongly attached. Now, I know your argument. Your argument is that, legally speaking, the European Union is based upon international treaties. You are right on that. But they are called international treaties. International. So
no, it's a common union treaty. It's not a treaty among states. It is a common union treaty, but that's not the point. The point is that sovereign states will always be able to leave international organizations if they so want to, and this has to be the case because this has to do with democratic accountability in the end. Mm-hmm. And states, if you sort of give up states and create an international organization that is supranational, then you need an entirely new way of democratic accountability. Because you can't sort of, if in a world of democratic states, there must be accountability somehow. And states will then decide if they want to sign away monetary policy, which they have done in Europe. But that will be a rare exception. So I think binding treaties on, say, climate and migration and so on, that's fully possible with the consent of states when they have an advantage in making agreements, being the fact that these problems cannot be solved by states alone. There has to be an international, even global solution.
Yeah, sorry, but the Maastricht Treaty is an international treaty or not?
Oh, this is an...
Yeah, it is, okay. Now,
it's not a treaty between, but I mean, that doesn't matter. It is, you give away decision-making power in the EU because you have majority voting, so the state can be voted down. Yeah. That's the definition of supranationality quite often.
Could I suggest an alternative to keep the supranational word and add in beyond the international agreements? So it's a wishful thinking in a way. Okay? Eh? No. No. It means that international agreements should arrive at a more binding entity, which is what we are. I mean, if you want to preserve Europe, you have to give more. We talk about European citizenship. Now, what is European citizenship if you don't have European authority, which doesn't mean a super state? It's not a super state. It's another entity in which the single nation states give some part of their sovereignty. That's.
I have a compromise which I think is reasonable. We use international when you speak, for example, about the United Nations, but you use supranational when you speak specifically of the European Union.
Sure. In fact, it's written as the European Union is a successful example. which does not imply that it can apply elsewhere. Yeah. Yes.
Yes, I have very pessimistic about solution this problem this night, but I have different doubt. The first page is a rather formal problem. A nation is I read, a nation is a group of people, correct, and a state is a community of people. Community is a group. So a nation and a state is a group. I suppose that sociologically will be more correct to say a state is an institution of community or institutional form of community, because it's not the same, the state and the nation. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for your point. I thought that the problem is addressed a very important one, but I thought it was taken care of if you read the whole sentence. Is a state is a community of people, and it continues without comma. So what follows belongs to the definition: endowed with, located on a given territory, and organized according to a common legal system, endowed with coercive power. What you have in mind is a famous distinction that goes back to general sociology at the beginning of the 20th century, that in the social world we have institutions that are social institutions that are a result of individual wills and lack an own will, and others where there is a collective will for. The classical example is the market and the firm. Yeah? And obviously the nation is analogous to the market. It's a connection of people, but there is not yet an organization that expresses a common will. While the state has a common will, there is a center that can make decisions for the state. While in a nation that is not yet organized as a state, there is no center will. And that is, I think, what the organized according to a common legal system endowed with coercive power is supposed to suggest.
I suppose it is only formal different. I don't want to struggle about it, but it's my suggestion.
Institution. So you would say a state is an institution constituted by a community of people. Okay, we can do that. We can put in the word institution.
I'm still a little troubled by the completely negative connotation of nationalism, because Polish nationalism was in fact a positive thing. There was a Polish nation that had no state, right, for a period of time. It was occupied by first the Nazis and then the Soviets, but there was Polish nationalism. It wasn't patriotism, it was for the Polish nation. And similarly, there's a Kurdish nationalism. The Kurds haven't had a state, but there's a Kurdish people who consider themselves a nation. They'd like a state. And so I do think there's a distinction between kind of the nationalism that we're seeing today, the ethno-nationalism, there's kind of, I don't know how I would distinguish it, but a nation can exist without a state, and there could be nationalism, a positive aspiration of a nation for a state.
Maybe
so I just wonder.
Yes, in relating to this, maybe we could use Charles Tilly's distinction. Some of you have quoted him: state-seeking nations and state-led nations, something like that. It's not. It could be helpful at some point, but.
Intended as an aggressive form of patriotism, but simply the desire of a nation to have a state based on the unity of the people, and that would be a legitimate form of nationalism, depending on which means you're using it. if, for example, the various German principalities try to fuse together, that is a completely legitimate form of German nationalism in the early 19th century. When then this is used to expand to Poland, for example, it's less legitimate. Yeah?
So when I said that, patriotism can also be and has historically been mobilized in less than just causes, it's the same with nationalism has also been used to, for instance, Indian nationalism is what enabled several million people to come under Gandhi's leadership and fight for freedom from colonial rule. That was nationalism. So there are types and types of nationalism, there are types and types of patriotism. Both can be good, both can be bad, both can be pathological. But so it's best, therefore, to adopt a slightly ambivalent phrasing. That's all I was saying. A slightly ambivalent phrasing on this would be good.
Thank you, Miraj.
As the words are used in different meanings, it would be enough after the word patriotism or nationalism to put a kind of definition. Nationalism as, and the nationalism defined by you is a negative, but this, under this definition. And other people are using the same word with a different definition. But just concerning the international organizations, the EU is international organization, not supranational, and it's added only sui generis. But Jana had right in this case.
There are persons who describe the EU as a supranational that, for example, are based on the Council of the Ministers that follow the principle of intergovernmental agreement. That would be a classical international cooperation, but that there are decisions, for example, by the European Court in Luxembourg that follow a supranational model because it is not based on a coming together of a national courts. They have recognized, of course, by parliamentary acts that there is a European court and the decisions are binding for all members. Of course, members can then leave the European Union. In this sense, there remains a moment of sovereignty of the states. But it's not the same thing as the intergovernmental agreement that we have on the level of the Council of the Ministers. These are the two pillars of the European Union. Yeah? I mean, again, it's, as you're rightly saying, always a question of definition. But the classical model of international cooperation would be the Vienna Conference, yeah, of 1815. Here, sovereign powers come together and try to develop common political strategies, and there is nothing beyond the agreements to which they just come. But the self-understanding of the European Union is different.
Yes, I would like only to add that Jean told the right thing, that, of course, the European Court is a juridical, not a political body, okay? But the sentences are binding for each country, and so the parliaments should change their laws. For instance, Italy, the Italian parliament should change the laws. So the juridical power has an influence, a determinant, decisive influence on the political power. So how can I call it international? It's not international.
So the point is that legal studies, and they play with the word, but go to the substance. There are certain issues about which cannot be negotiated among countries. That is the point. Certain issues. Other, on the other hand, can be negotiated. In fact, the example made by Paolo is one example. I made the example of the common currency, etc. In other words, what they want, and that is in fact the meaning of the last chapter of Caritas in Veritate, which was not, in my opinion, understood by most scholars. Because they are stubborn, they remain with their idea, they are conservative. Because the point is that we cannot continue to proclaim that there are problems and not being able to change our categories of minds. But why should we stick to our category of mind? Where is it written? That is not the laws by Mosè, etc. In other words, what I mean is that there is an evolution even in categorical rights. And the point is that today, take the case of climate change. The climate change, why we cannot cope with it? Because each country wants to have a way. No, that is not possible. Because the climate, it's a common good. It's not a public good. So it does not pertain to individual country. And if those who say, we have to say to them, shut up, because you are against the common good. Or you have to say, I do not believe in common good. Okay, and then I respect. But you cannot say, I believe in common good and I pretend to maintain the sovereignty of my country to dictate the law. That is impossible. That is a logical contradiction.
Stefano, I know that my own limited authority is subjected to your final approval. So I know that you only delegated for a certain moment your authority as president of Academy to me for this section. But as long as you do not revoke this delegation, I have to remind you that we're already 15 minutes beyond the time. We have the closed session, and we have the commemoration of deceased academicians. However, Archbishop Roland and Rocco, I think I have observed he's on your back. Archbishop Roland was first, and then Rocco. I ask you both to be relatively short, and then we must begin with the closed meeting.
Okay, I wanted only to remind you that Europe was born with a steel and coal organization, which was supranational, because decisions were taken at the majority in the Council of Government of this organization. And Pius XII praised this as a first step to a more integration of European nations.
Thank you. First observation, the European Union is a complex structure that has characters of an international organization and characters of a supranational organization. In the matters in which you can decide with the majority of the Council of Ministers and with the control of Parliament, that is with the democratic control required by Jane, then in these areas, the Union is a supranational organization. It is not so much the problem of the Court of Justice. It is because the Court of Justice belongs to a different order of consideration. But in those areas, the Union is a supranational organization. In the areas in which we have retained the rule of unanimity, in those areas, it is an international organization. So it is both. It is a complex. It's a complex system in which there are both things. I agree on the other point. Is it desirable that we have a certain evolution towards supranational organizations? Yes, although, of course, with the democratic guarantees required by Jane. Second observation, but do we really need to add a qualifying statement on the European Union, because we already have the institutions of the post-war period, and the Union is one of those institutions, created to ensure a peaceful world order, etc., are showing signs of wear. It is already said. I don't know whether in such a short time we need to repeat it one way or another. Third observation, nationalism. The Christian social doctrine has the heritage of the polemics of the Catholic Church against the nationalist movements of the 19th century, starting with Gregor XVI and continuing. But from a European point of view, that's true. Patriotism and nationalism, it is consolidated. But in the new countries, nationalism has come to mean the struggle against colonialism in order to build up a national state. Then the qualifying will be good. To add a sentence that qualifies nationalism will be good.
Let me tell you a story. Listen, Naraya. An investor asked God how much he values $1 million. God replies, a cent. He then asks, how long does he regard a millennium as being? And God says, a second. The investor says, could I please have a cent? God says, certainly, in a second. So now I think we have to thank all of you. We remain the members of the Academy because we have a formalistic thing. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for it. And we will meet downstairs for the dinner. The dinner is the last supper, so it's a special supper. It's a special supper.
Lei dice giuridico, sì, ma poi quando noi dobbiamo cambiare le leggi, allora...
Sono dei conservatori da parte.
E chi? I polacchi? Anche americani, anche Alden.
Sì, sono dei cioè, non vogliono cambiare le categorie di questi.
No, ma perché sono i giuristi sono terribili, lo sai.
Perché dice così, ma no. Let me start with the following remark. We have to, yes, if you could step out. We have to commemorate one of our colleagues who passed away recently. The name is Belisario Betancourt. I asked Juan Lach, who couldn't possibly come to participate to this session for personal reasons, to write the commemoration. So I will read part of it because the text, you will, if you are interested, to the full text is on the table. So what I'm going to read comes from Juan Lach from Buenos Aires. Last December, our colleague Belisario Betancourt passed away. He belonged to the group of scholars appointed by His Holiness John Paul II when he founded the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences in 1994. He was 95 years old, and a while ago, he could not attend our plenary sessions due to health problems. That is why many of our colleagues today did not have the opportunity to meet him. Those of us who had the good fortune of knowing him could enjoy his wisdom, forged especially in the field of politics, where he became president of Colombia between 1982 and 1986. They enjoyed the most those who understood his brilliant Spanish language because, as several of his compatriots, he had an exceptional handling of it. He was born in Amaga, province of Antioquia, in 1923. After studying law at the Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana de Medellín, he graduated as a Doctor of Law and Economics with the thesis. The title was Economic Public Order. Later, he would obtain the degree of Doctor of Honoris Causa in Humanities at the University of Colorado and Georgetown in Washington. He married in 1945 with Rosa Helena Alvarez, with whom he had 3 children, Beatriz, Diego, and Maria Clara. The same year, 1945, he began his political career as a deputy to the Assembly of Antioquia by the Conservative Party, arriving in 1950 to the House of Representatives. After 4 years as a member of the National Constituent Assembly, he was Minister of Labor and Social Security, Senator and Ambassador to Spain, after being defeated by Julio Cesar Turbay in 1978 presidential election. The main achievement of his government was the pacification of his country then, and for a long time, one of the most violent in Latin America, as we know. From the beginning of his government, Belisario raised the need to initiate a peace process and to execute a political reform that facilitated dialogue with the guerrillas and other illegal groups in order to reach a negotiated solution to the conflict. With this objective, he promoted an amnesty project before the Congress, which became law at the end of 1992. His peace process resulted in the signing of the agreements of the Uribe, signed by a peace commission on behalf of the government and by the general staff of the guerrillas FARC, FARC. On March 28, 1984, the FARC ordered the ceasefire of its 27 guerrillas fronts, while President Betancourt ordered the same to all civilian and military authorities in the country. This did not mean the end of the secular political violence in Colombia, but it clearly was an initial first step whose fruits can be seen even today, 35 years later. After his presidency in 1986, he ended his political career. Betancourt was also an active writer and journalist. Among his works, it is possible to find stories, poetry, and essays on public policies, all in Spanish. Many of the last ones are related to the objects of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. Among his last public activities, his designation stands out on the part of the Secretary General of the United Nations as a member of the Truth Commission of El Salvador, which he chaired in 1993. To conclude, perhaps the highlight of his career has been his commitment to the task of bringing the ethics and values of Christianity to real public life. It is a task that is hard to get rid of because errare humanum est. However, of Belisario Betancourt, it can be said without no doubt that he fulfilled it with a broadly favorable balance. Thank you to Juan Lach. So this will be included in the... Now, what else? Any remark concerning this session? Remarks not in terms of what we just have been discussing a few minutes ago, but on organizational matters, models, etc. For instance, just to give you an example, do you believe that 3 full days is the optimal format, or would you suggest 2 days and a half or something like that? I mean, we have to collect this information because tomorrow morning the Council will meet in this same place in order to propose changes to future initiatives of one type or the other. Now, the floor is open to you. Please do not hesitate to externalize any suggestion or critique or whatever you feel like that.
I have a very
Please.
A very short suggestion. Obviously, we don't need so much paper. So perhaps because of the sustainability of the planet, we can reduce the use of paper because we also have computers and, well, this is a suggestion. Of course, there are people who always prefer to read in paper, but it's not necessary in many.
Sense that sometimes we cannot forecast how many people will attend, not only among the members of the academy, but also from, for instance, ambassadors, etc. And so it is difficult in those cases to send them in. That is the reason why. But your point is well taken.
So from some of my previous visits to this body before I was an academician, I recall that at least in some of the gatherings, the organization was such that there was one or more designated respondents or commentators to papers. Now, Personally, I think that's helpful, because to have one person who focuses in on the paper, asks difficult critical questions, I think helps to kick off a little bit more of a dialectic in the discussion. And so that's just one idea that I tend to favor tendentially, but.
Thank you. You should know that is also my favorite suggestion, but I have to, because since I'm supposed to be flexible, because what happens, that the respondent needs to have the paper at least 15 days in advance, and the authors never comply with the rule. Even in this case, we received the papers 1 day before. And so if you write in the program, Mr. Carrozza's paper and respondents Anna Marta, unless she received it at least 10, 15 days, she will come here and she will be. That is the point. In fact, I myself, it was favorable, because the respondent, in general, my proposal was to have 20 minutes for the presentator and 10 minutes allowed to the respondent. So it's 30 minutes. And then another 30 minutes for general discussion. But it didn't work for exactly that reason. And some authors, if they happen to know they are supposed to send the paper a fortnight before, they say, I do not come.
Yeah, very quickly, I'll just say it's only as you say that I recall that the last time that you invited me to be such a respondent, I heard Jeffrey Sachs making the presentation at the time. That was the first time I heard it at all, and then I was called to respond to it.
Because I could afford, because I obliged you, because otherwise I was going to knock you down. But I cannot use that with other people.
And if I may say so, we had somehow a dialectic in the papers of Anna Marta and Jose on the Catalan question. So that came close to the idea of two people reflecting on the same issue.
Yeah. Other remarks? Yes, the Chancellor.
To facilitate the discussion, we need to put some rules, because for example, I follow the idea of the Academy of Sciences. I think 50 minutes is okay, and the paper half an hour. But the replay of the person need to be 2 minutes, synthetic. In the contrary, also the questions. In the other academy, they put no more than 3 minutes. No more than 3 minutes. In the contrary, we have many conferences and not go to the point. So this is very important. We need to be habituated to summarize, to synthesize the questions. In the contrary, speak one. In the 50 minutes, we have two questions and two replies. Or no. So there are, I think, Habermas or some of these German philosophers put rules in the discussion. We need to have rules in the discussion. Maybe we need to follow some rules, because it's really important.
No, but that is the habit of the synod. I happened to be there once, and I remember there was John Paul II. And in the synod, Bishop, not yet Cardinal Marx, asked him. Now, in the synod, there is a traffic lights, green, yellow, and red. When 3 minutes before the time, you get yellow. And then when the red light appears, the system works automatically, stops. So Marx was talking, and he went on, in spite of the fact that he is German, as we know. At that point, the microphone stopped working. And John Paul II, I happened to hear with my ear, said, now everybody will say that the Pope prevents Marx to talk. No, but you see, I found that used here in this state, the traffic lights, because people observe the speakers. When they observe the yellow lights, then they know they have another 3 minutes. Otherwise, but apart from that, the point I agree with the Chancellor, because otherwise, sometimes certain people wanted to say something, but for lack of time, they are prevented, and that is not fair. So if you are agreeable, we can propose for the future that just because the papers are on the table or already sent in advance when they are punctual, that the presenter has 20 minutes. Because in 20 minutes you cannot summarize but make the points. And then in the discussion, allowing it, we can allow ourselves instead of 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, but not more than 5 minutes. Because if we really want to democratize the discussion. Otherwise, as you have seen, a certain number of people are practically prevented from taking. What do you think about such a proposal?
Yes, I think that this is very important, that there has to be more discipline. The cognitive neuroscience will tell you that the brain has a pleasure center and a center of pain. You can induce pain by shaming the colleagues that don't ask questions, but articulate, often clearly present, company accepted, their own thesis on maybe alloctonous domains. So the questions need to be more disciplined, they need to be more precise, and they need to be more kept within the time constraints. And major international conferences, scientific conferences, the US Congress, by the way, has the same. Yellow, green, yellow, red. It's over. And these are the great senators who run the new empire. And they know when the microphone is off.
Other remarks?
May I say a word? I think there is some difference between the other academy and the social sciences. In the physical sciences, you may give the result of a research in few minutes, in 20 minutes or so. But we need to demonstrate our point of view. We need to call for philosophy, for history, for our demonstration. So we need a little bit more time, I guess.
Yeah, a little more time, but the bishops also... I think so. And are the bishop to put these rules. So, Stefano put the sample of the bishop, no? Yeah, the synod of the bishop. Yeah. So, this, I think, for the science, 2 minutes. For the humanistic, 3 minutes, but no more, 4 minutes. So, but some rules. Maybe, Vittorio, you can find these rules that I think was Habermas or some of your philosophers to put rules in the discussion. This is really important.
I agree with you. I don't think that Habermas will help us very much because they're a very generic philosophical principle. We can follow Robert's rules, for example. Yeah, that's an American system. Robert's rules, you call them, Paolo, or Robert's rules, I think. Yeah. That is a way how you do it. But certainly, it's partly an intercultural problem. I mean, let me mention an anecdote. Forgive me, Anna Marta, if I come to a beloved country. I was once invited to present a work that I had done the first translation of Vico Scienza with a friend in the European Parliament, which was a great honor. And we were invited 10 people, and we had 60 minutes. This meant that everyone knew that one had 6 minutes, and the Spanish colleagues spoke 20 minutes, which meant that 3 people who had flown from all parts of Europe could not say anything because it took more than 3 times the time that was given to him. And I was not so much furious at him, but I was furious at the chair of a session because he should have stopped him. In very clear voices, this is impolite what you're doing, you're taking away the chance of other people. Therefore, I tried to be relatively clear today. It's perhaps impolite, but it has to be done. I wanted to say one other thing because this is an interesting aspect. I personally think that a charm of our academy is that we combine intellectuals from very different disciplines, from very different countries, and we try to include some practitioners of politics. And I also want to explain how we organized this conference. And of course, we try to include princes of the church, like Archbishop Roland. We tried also in this conference, for example, I invited Horst Köhler, the former president of Germany and managing director of IMF, and he had accepted. He had told us already the title of this lecture. We had it in the first draft of the program, but then he told us that he had to work during these days for the United Nations, his special envoy of Gutierrez, and couldn't come. There is always the risk. And also, concerning your question about non-European, Marcelo made a strong effort to invite several cardinals. We had originally invited 3 cardinals, 2 from Asia and 1 Cardinal Kasper from here, but they are very busy. They, at the beginning, said we can come, and then they said they could not come. So the risk is when you try to invite people who are high profile from heads of states, cardinals, that they will tell you then at the beginning we come and then they cannot come, and we cannot reproach them because they have very important tasks. But in principle, I think this is an aspect of our academy. With Betancourt, for example, we had an example of a politician intellectual, and that is something that benefits our academy.
No, but I think if we fix the rules ex ante, in other words, we announce these rules, people coming to our session, they get already ready with their mind. So if we say 20 minutes for the presentation, 5 minutes for question and 3 minutes for the answer, I think that in 5 minutes people can express their views, etc. Provided that such a rule is implemented, there will be room. Not to mention the fact that, as you noticed, we always allow free time just during the coffee breaks and before or after. And those are times where people, as we have observed in these days, they exchange their views, they continue to discuss. Because at the end of the day, it's a matter of fairness, of not being selfish, because it is obvious if I take more time, I subtract time to somebody else. That is a fact of nature.
The ideas are very brief. To have the idea, if we have an idea, it's brief. So the Spanish say, lo bueno si breve, 2 veces bueno. So this is, I think, is very important.
No, there is such an agreement, so that we announce in advance, because telling these rules at the very moment we started the session might be inconvenient. But if the authors know it, on the other hand, everybody is free to prepare a paper as long as they like, and the papers are available. So it's not that we prevent circulation of our idea, but simply to finalize, because certain people bit complained, in other words. Please.
This may seem like a relatively minor issue, but the meetings of the Academy, the plenary sessions, always happen at the last week of my semester. And so I cannot come to the full session because I cannot afford to cancel a full week of class or have teaching assistants cover a full week of class. So I'm flying home with papers to grade and exams to give. And it means I'm more distracted coming here as well. So I don't know why it's always around May 1st or the end of April. If it was 2 weeks later, I would personally be able to attend the full sessions. So I'm just curious. And maybe it's a European way, but mid-May would be, but most of us are
that would fit Americans, but not Europeans.
Ah, that's what I was wondering.
And not even
well, I'm a
Asian.
minority, so that's okay.
No, but perhaps we can cope if we include during the time Sunday. Because even though you are teaching, you are not teaching on Saturday and on Sunday. So if the session is, for instance, 2 days and a half, yes, you can cope.
And
you can fix Friday morning your lecture.
That's right.
You fly Friday afternoon.
Yes.
So
that has been the case a couple of times. So having literally the whole session Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
But in fact, we always done like that.
Yeah.
The point is that May the 1st is not holiday in the United States. That's the problem. But for the European was perfect because May the 1st it's holiday. But you are right. I think we have to take, because you see, Americans, after all, they have a soul as well, so they deserve attention. No, please, yes.
I am forced to talk because of age, you see. I mean, we are quite different from a kind of Congress, say the American Economic Association, whatever. In the Congresses, we have seen that even in associations very close, that we have, I would say, fraternal relations with the others, they was concentrated in the topic. What is the general topic that is going to be dealt with in this year? And then they attend the Congress, a small percentage of our community, only those that are working habitually on that point. The rest are not interested in what is happening in the whole. This is it seems that has not much importance, but is absolutely important. The International Institute of Public Finance, that is in Munich at this moment. We used to have, I would say in the classical time, in early 70s, used to be a firm group of old professors that were there at any Congress, because topics was the minimum importance. They are not playing to published in a reference review, and they were interested in the topic because that topic corresponds to science in which they are devoted. This, at this moment, disappears completely in the same institute. Every year is one Congress. This Congress normally attends between 250, 300 persons, but different this year from the last year. Nobody knows anybody. This is one of the problems, that the academy is a completely different philosophy. We all know each other, and we are waiting for the moment in which we are going to have the opportunity to meet again. We, maybe that by economic reasons, we finish with the fraternal day that we used to have in former years, in which we have an excursion, that we have a day for just to get together. I agree in that. Then we reduce one day that it was not a productive day only from the point of view of personal relationship, but that is not much important. But we should consider that the point to be established as a main point for the academy cannot be something diluted, because only those people specifically interested in the topic will be if we take this system. Then there is another risk. In my history, I have seen the, how can I put in the soft way, the bad influence of the science, exact science or experimental science to the humanistic science on the methodology side. We change at this moment. We are not interested in speak about economics. We are interested in speak about econometrics. We are not interested in sociology, but in sociometry. And we make all the things. One day the philosophy will be also quantitative. and this is something that we need to prevent. I know that this is the new fashion, and if you want to publish in such a magazine, either you go with this complicated model that nobody knows what is utility of that, and that is finished for all the rest of people. Sorry, I don't want to change, but I agree with you because what you propose from the point of view of time, I agree with you because most of 20 minutes is sufficient to us with lights can say, yes, please go to the topic, not go by the forest.
Thank you. Other people? No, you know, I'm certainly, I know that you know Aspen Institute, the Aspen. They have a rule all over the world. Those who accept the invitation to the Aspen meeting, they are compelled to stay from the beginning to the end. Otherwise, they will be expelled. Now, one could say, but so people, no, the opposite. Everybody is striving to get the invitation. So it's not true that being too lax invites people. The opposite is true. Because I was always amazed to see important, because as you know, Aspen refers to elite, not, and still they stay from the beginning, because if they say we start at 9 and we end at 7 in the afternoon, they stay there, because otherwise they will be asked to live forever, etc. Now, we cannot do, of course, the same, but we have to admit that the inflow, outflow of people is not very nice. I mean, that people stay for half a day, another one for 1 day, etc. We have to consider that for the future, in my opinion, in inviting without imposing people, if they accept our invitation, to stay at least for 90–80% of the time. Otherwise, I am prepared to state that, because people should know the social norm, because that is a social norm. What's the point if you accept an invitation to a 3-day? That is why 3 days, in my opinion, is too much. 2.5 is more than enough, etc. But in that case, we should invite people to consider to stay from the beginning until the end, because that is also a sign of gratitude and recognition of the rights of the others.
May I say something to that? In principle, I'm completely in agreement with you. It's very impolite if you come only for a short time. But if we are interested in having people who are either with a heavy teaching load like Alan, and we cannot fit our conference during the vacation time of an American university. If we want to have people who are, for example, politically active, we must be flexible. Teobaldo, for example, told me from the beginning he will be here for 2 days. He was here for all 2 days, but the 3rd day he cannot stay.
No, but that's why I said I did not impose.
Exactly.
Invite.
Yeah. And Köhler had told me when he had at the beginning said, I will come, but I can only come for 1 day because I have so many, such a dense calendar. We should respect that there are people where if they come for 1 day, that is legitimate. And with regard to the duration of the conference, I don't know if you remember, the last conferences were 4 days.
But with 1 day off.
Exactly, which meant 5 days, because since the day in the middle was off, you had to come for 5 days. And that was extremely demanding, and therefore we decided to reduce it only to 3 days. Question, could we have covered as many areas of the world, from Africa to China, India, etc., Russia, if we had only 2 days, would have been difficult. So my suggestion is 2 or maximum 3 days is a reasonable duration, but it depends on the topic, whether we should choose 2 or 3 days. That would be my suggestion.
But you know, when we were in Oxford as a student, we were amazed by the fact that when an English family invited us, they said in the invitation, you are invited to dinner from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. At the beginning I said, these English people are crazy, but then I started appreciating, because they said, what's the point of people coming, if we say we start at 7, some people in Italy arrive at 7, 7:30, a quarter past, that is unpolite. Since pasta has to be cooked on the spot, the point is that the latecomer produces a danger to the other ones, because you cannot prepare pasta in advance. But so, I take your point. But if bit by bit we can create what is called a social norm, and habit, social habit, because if information spreads. Any other question or remark? No, I've been very happy with, was a successful conference, this one. And the volume which is coming up will testify that.
This is a very modest proposal, but having come to the Vatican,
The microphone.
I have not had a chance to see the Vatican. I've had a chance to come here, and I see these beautiful buildings, and I have a guidebook which tells me what they're about, but I would just love a little bit of time, maybe in the evening or whatever, just to go and somebody show me little bits. It won't take long, but it means that I would feel a little bit more happy, that I understood.
Look, why did I say 2 days and a half? Because the other half day, for those who are willing, we can organize a guided tour to see it. And that is fair.
Anyway, if you see the basilica and you see the casino, you see the most beautiful part of the Vatican.
No, but we can...
That's a case of benevolent nationalism.
Okay, so we go to the Last Supper now. But nobody will put in cross. So thank you.